Chapter 12. Alice Meets Polly. Her time with Reginald Shield had left Alice feeling a little melancholy. It wasn't so much what he said, but what he left unsaid. The valet didn't talk about what he might have left behind, or what other time he actually hailed from, but Alice thought he'd given up hope of going home, and even given up hope of leaving the castle. Instead of pursuing alternative exit strategies, he spent his free time endlessly playing with his Leyden jars in an imprecise way that did neither the valet nor the castle any good. He seemed lonely, as if he were afraid to make connections with anyone living here. He even seemed to hold the other people who'd been trapped, like herself and Miss Pocket, at arm's length. Was his being aloof just some kind of occupational requirement for a valet? Somehow, she doubted it and felt a bit sorry for him. There had to be a shape, a logic to this puzzle, she thought, the same way there was a shape and a logic to a good song. Sometimes you started with a melody, sometimes with a rhythm, sometimes with a lyric, but until all the necessary pieces came together, it wasn't finished. Though she ordinarily wouldn't have dreamed of poking in the nooks and crannies of someone else's house, she currently was the de facto mistress of Carl the Castle, and her inner Nancy Drew was actually having fun exploring. Leaving the carriage house with its smell of burnt wood and depressed valet, Alice wondered how Brian's apologies were coming along. Assuming the worst, she decided to check out the garden. At least that way she would have the benefit of a little knowledge of the plants growing there, enough to hold her own should the conversation this afternoon devolve to the point where the safest thing to talk about was plants. A good hostess, she thought, somewhat primly, is always prepared. "What do you think of the roses?" she practiced saying brightly as she took a winding gravel path around to the side of the house, but as she turned the corner around a tall hedge, her brisk steps faltered as she abruptly realized she had her work cut out for her. The gardens were extensive. They went on and on, looking to Alice like something the length of a football field in every direction. There were flowers and plants and trees and decorative bits of statuary. This wasn't some suburban backyard. She wondered if she was going to have to flag down a gardener to explain it all to her, but fortunately, near the side of the house, closest to the carriageway, was a formal flower garden with precisely trimmed hedges and, thank goodness, rose bushes. "How about them roses, eh?" she asked no one in particular. Other plants, whose names she did not know, dotted the area at regular intervals, and there were benches set neatly every few feet. Clearly, this was a decorative place where castle visitors, at least the ones who didn't want to gallop picturesquely on fiery steeds across the moors, could get a little fresh air and take in a nibble of nature. It was quiet and peaceful, but not very colorful in this season. Alice continued walking, wishing she'd brought the 19th century equivalent of a nice, warm parka, because the same chilly wind that made the curtains billow so attractively inside the house was pretty miserable if one happened to be outdoors. Unfortunately, when she made her way down to the carriage house, it had been an accident. She hadn't intended to go outside at all, and all she had for warmth was a shawl, clearly intended more for decoration than winter weather. She did her best to keep warm by traveling at a brisk pace, almost a jog. Eventually, she found herself stepping down some stone stairs into a space out of the wind, discovering what was clearly the vegetable garden for the kitchen. Raised beds and trellises, along with a greenhouse, indicated where the ingredients for the daily meals had to be coming from. Alice spied a chicken coop as well, which seemed an economical way to get fresh eggs. She did not spy anyone who looked gardenish to question as to the nature of these plants, but there were one or two people fetching winter greens in big baskets. These people were trailed by a small girl, industriously filling her pockets with the leaves the others had left behind. Far from being nervous or furtive, when she saw Alice watching the little girl, Alice estimated her about 7 or 8 years of age, just bobbed a curtsy, grinning so broadly that Alice was sure this was the same little girl Brian had met on the beach. She crossed the space between them, and the girl said, "M'lady, a good morning tea." "Good morning," said Alice. "I'm sorry, I don't know your name, but I think you met my brother." "I did," agreed the girl. "I'm Polly Sharp, your brother. He put on a play that was really something. Lord Latimer's a wit, ain't he?" "Half of one, anyway," muttered Alice. "Did he give you permission to get some food from the garden?" It was something Brian absolutely would have done. "No, my lady," said the girl. "He did give me leave for all the fossils I might find, though, miss. I think he's a full wit." "You wits are something else," the girl said loyally. "Just like you and Mrs. Downs. She's the one who gave me leave to take a salad now and again from the garden, in payment for the quill pens my dad makes on her behalf. And eggs, too," she added somewhat obscurely. There was a lot there for Alice to unpack, and she took a stab at one of the many unclear points. "Your dad makes eggs for Mrs. Downs?" Polly giggled. "No, m'lady," she said again. "The hens and geese are great layers, so there's plenty to spare. Mrs. Downs and my dad knew each other from long ago. He showed her the way things were when she was new to the castle, and she introduced him to my mum. They're still good friends, so he gives her a special price when she comes to shop, and she lets me take what we need from the garden." Her grin grew. "See, I've been around this place my whole life long, and I can tell. You are one of the wits of the castle, too." "What wits, Polly?" asked Alice carefully. The little girl clearly wanted to say more, and even if she tended to speak in a torrent of words, there was a sense that if she tried, Alice might be able to sift her way to a grain of sense. Nancy Drew had taught her the importance of local informants. Normally, though, the problem was gaining their confidence, not slowing them down. "A wit," began Polly, as if reciting from a home-taught lesson, "is one who arrives at the castle in the midst of a storm, one with an odd way of speaking. They go on for a couple of days all in a tither, looking for something. Just like you've been doing, m'lady." She smiled and gave a surprising nod of her little head. "But soon or late, the wits all learn the ways of the castle. Then they can settle down and get to acting like normal folks, most of the time." "Are there a lot of wits, Polly?" asked Alice. "A fair few. There's you and your brother, of course," she said. "Of course," echoed Alice. "But who else?" "Oh, folks of the castle." "Like Mr. Shield?" asked Alice. Polly nodded. "Him, yes, and Mrs. Downs, as I said. Miss Pocket is one, and there were others before, to hear my dad tell of it. Back when he was a boy and worked at the castle, that's when he learned all about them. He told me that wits like you were something special, and come from a long way off, even farther than Paris, France, which is why sometimes you talk so peculiar. Your dad runs a shop, I think you said? Alice was glad the little girl lacked any kind of shyness. Polly nodded. It's a good one. Just about anything you can think of we store, but mainly he does quills and letters. Writing for people who don't know how to do it themselves, she explained. We even got part of a dinosaur hanging from the ceiling. You'd like it. It's in the village. You should come and visit sometime. Alice grinned back. Maybe I will, she agreed. But tell me more about your dad. You said he knows all about the wits? Oh, yes, my lady, said Polly, full of assurance. He can tell a story with the best of them, she added with pride. And now it's my turn to have a story to tell, now that you and his lordship have arrived. There was a tremendous amount of lightning last night, you know. Said Alice, in a non-committal voice, usually reserved for playing cards with her family. I don't suppose your father has told you anything more about the wits, has he? Truth to be told, there's not much more to tell, admitted Polly, clearly a stranger to the term poker face. Just that I should try and be helpful if I see you've been up on the moors or down by the water. If ever I should see one of the wits and they appear a little dizzy or something, my dad says, just bring 'em back here to the castle and let them saddle. That's what he tells me. Very good advice, approved Alice. And you have been very helpful and kind, Polly, both to me and my brother. She saw that the little girl's hands and face were red with the chill, and took off the shawl she wore and wrapped it around Polly's shoulders. There you go, she said. Accept this with my gratitude. Whir! Thanks so much, marveled Polly. It's ever so soft. Thank ye so much. I can't wait to go show my dad. Thank ye. And with that, the little chatterbox gave a hurried curtsy and scampered away, off to show her father her latest prize from the wits at the castle. And Alice, who was beginning at least to define the edges of the puzzle facing her, found her way back inside the house. If their mystery were a song, she thought she might have found the first thread of a tune to hum, and she was starting to form some lyrics in her head. End of Chapter 12, Lord Latimer's Ladies, written by Margaret Elin Schmidt and Dan McLaughlin, read by Dan McLaughlin, 2024.